Okay, this is week one for the Agon Institute, and this is letter E, the Roman games. Hi, welcome back to the Agon Institute for Sports Ministry. We're talking about the first century athletics and how they intersected with the first century church. Now, what we have in front of you is a couple of pictures of the ancient Roman facilities. You'll see that this first one looks maybe a little unknown to you, but this is the remnants of the Colosseum. The Colosseum, of course, is where the gladiator battles and the battles with the animals took place. We've talked the last couple lectures about the Greek games, and there were some high ideals there. But we do need to take this one little look into the Roman style of games and what began to happen with the Roman games that was much different than, in fact, the Greek games. And you can already get a sense for it. Gladiators, as opposed to runners and throwers and boxers. The Romans took these games and made them much different. Now we'll talk about that a little bit more in our next lecture. But what I want to give you here are the facilities. You can see how much more sophisticated they are than these Greek facilities that we've been seeing so far. The Greek facilities were just the land. And in fact, oftentimes in the Olympic game site, they were planted in crops, and then once the crops were taken, then they were mown down, and then the games could take place. But not so in Rome. Rome took everything and made it bigger and better. It was an era in which the games changed dramatically. Now what you see in this picture is you see basically the locker rooms or the cages. And everything that's in that oval in that picture that you see would have been covered with a flooring, and then it would have been sand that would have been put everywhere on top of that flooring. And then out of the bowels of this there would be some trap doors that would open up, and the gladiators or the victims or the animals would come up through these trap doors. And so this whole labyrinth underneath, this whole incredible city underneath, if you will, of these games, of this game site rather, was just a massive undertaking. And then the seats up above, you see above the oval, you see all these seats. This is where the spectators would have been. Now I'm going to give you a second look at the Colosseum here, and it's focused in a little bit more on the far end, and you'll see some white seats that are there. This white seats were for the Greek officials. This is where all of the governmental or high priority people would have sat to watch the games. The Greek games, as we mentioned, were not for spectators. They were for participants. But the Roman games were for the spectators. And this is where we get so much of the blood and gore from, because this is what they had tried to embody and tried to produce this high, what they called entertainment, for spectators to come. There's one other reason I have this picture, the second picture. And in the upper level of the stadium there, you can faintly see a white cross. Now that white cross was placed there shortly after the Colosseum had stopped being used for these brutal kinds of games. And that cross there was then given for all of those people who had died during those games in memory of them. Well, as secularization comes and goes, the cross was removed, but the cross was reinstated when saner minds came. And it stands, the last I knew, still stands as a memorial to all who perished during those games. Your last slide you have there on the Roman section is the Circus Maximus. And if you've seen movies like Ben-Hur, and by the way, I hear there's a new Ben-Hur being created, you will see this in a very dramatic sense and get a sense of how things went during those times and during those areas. So the Circus Maximus was very much a improvement, if you will, on the Colosseum because it was so much larger. The Colosseum would have sat maybe 50 to 65,000 people. The Circus Maximus would have sat, some estimates, up to 400,000 people. At least 250,000 people would have sat around this. This was much more for races, chariot races, than what it was for gladiatorial battles, but there were gladiatorial battles than others that occurred here. All right, this gives you a perspective then of the kind of facilities that the Romans had and how they took the Greek ideals and began to move them in some different directions. So what we're going to do in our next instructional video is we're going to talk about the Greek, the Roman, and the Jewish perspectives of sport and help us understand this body, mind, and spirit, and help us to understand what's going on in our culture, our athletic culture of the 21st century, and how we can get some models as a result of that. So, join us next time. Thanks for being here at the Agon Institute, 21st Century Models of Sports Ministry.